Welcome along to the final hour of the football show in the company of the former England internationals Stephen Warnock and Sue Smith. Our chief reporter, Kaveh Solokol, is here, as well as Manchester United part company with Erik ten Hag, with the club 14th in the Premier League after an underwhelming start to the season. Let's just remind you of the club statement from Manchester United, released just a few minutes ago, that says Erik ten Hag has left his role as Manchester United men's first-team manager. Erik was appointed in April 2022 and led the club to 2 domestic trophies, winning the Carabao Cup in 2023 and the FA Cup in 2024. We are grateful to Erik for everything he's done during his time with us and wish him well for the future. Ruud van Nistelrooy will take charge of the team as interim head coach, supported by the current coaching team, whilst a permanent head coach is recruited. So, Kaveh, 12 points behind leaders Manchester City at the very early stages of this Premier League season, having finished 8th last season, 31 points off the pace. Is it any surprise that Manchester United have acted now?
Not at all. I think Erik ten Hag has been a dead man walking for quite a long time. Everyone knows that Manchester United were talking to other managers in the summer. When they couldn't do a deal with another manager, they decided to stick with Erik ten Hag and trigger the 1-year extension in his contract. They backed him in the transfer market again in the summer, but results and performances simply haven't been good enough this season. I can give you a sort of insight into Manchester United's thinking. The decision to part company with Erik ten Hag was a collective decision, but a unanimous decision. That means everybody in senior roles at the club agreed that this was the right time to part company with Erik ten Hag. So we're talking about Ineos, the minority owners, Jim Ratcliffe, Chief Executive Omar Barada, Dave Brailsford, also the Glazer family. They all decided unanimously that Erik ten Hag needed to go now. They thought that they gave him time to work within the new structure that has been set up at the club. We all know all the changes that have been made behind the scenes at Manchester United. They felt, OK, let's give Erik ten Hag some time to see if he can work under this structure. But unfortunately, they feel results and performances simply have not been good enough. And for the second season in a row, they made a poor start to the season. And that's why they decided it was time for ten Hag to go.
From your understanding, was this the decision that was reached during that lengthy meeting between the club's hierarchy in London during the last international break, that they had come to a conclusion that ultimately, whether they made the decision then or later, he was not the right man for the job moving forwards?
That was a 6-hour meeting in Knightsbridge at Ineos's offices. All the key senior people at United were at that meeting. They weren't just talking about Erik ten Hag at that meeting, but obviously they talked a lot about the club's poor start to the season. I'm not sure if the decision was made at that meeting because they decided to stick with him. But I think after that meeting, they did start putting out feelers again to see if they could find somebody to replace Erik ten Hag. I thought it was very, very telling. A week ago, Erik ten Hag came out in a news conference and accused the media basically of lying.
Fairy tales and lies.
He said we were writing fairy tales and lies. Well, I don't want to say I told you so to Erik ten Hag because I think he was under a lot of pressure. But what people have been reporting has been accurate. Everyone's known that United have been looking for someone else. Now you've got to look at the future. Who could they go for? Gareth Southgate has said, I don't want to work again until the summer. Ruben Amorim at Sporting would cost a lot of money to buy him out of his contract. Thomas Frank, somebody they've met and talked to a lot. Xavi, who's out of work at the moment. Of course, everyone knows what he did at Barcelona. I'm being told, apparently, somebody here was telling me that yesterday Xavi's wife posted a picture on social media of her son wearing a Manchester United kit. So read into that what you will. But United have made it clear that Ruud van Nistelrooy is only an interim. They're looking for somebody to replace ten Hag on a full-time basis.
Well, we'll come into candidates maybe a little bit later on the hour. There's a lot to unpack from the decision and the timing, Stephen and Sue, as to why now. I mentioned some of the numbers, Stephen, from last season. 8th in the Premier League, 31 points behind the champions Manchester City. They lost 14 games and finished with a negative goal difference. hindsight's a wonderful thing, but even though you win the FA Cup, surely the end of last season was the time to shake hands and say thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm sure it was, but they obviously felt that there was not a suitable candidate out there that they wanted to come in and replace him. I look at now and the England decision to take on Thomas Tuchel. Would he have been a fit that would have looked that they would have looked at, or was it that they already spoke to Thomas Tuchel and felt that he wasn't the right man that they wanted at the helm? It was very surprising that that the Manchester United kept on Erik ten Hag after last season. They were poor, really poor. This identity that we all talk about, it's because we are still searching for it. The big thing I'd look at now is, if you're looking at how football clubs run and what you do and how big a decision your manager is, you only have to look at Aston Villa. Look at Aston Villa and what they did in approaching Unai Emery. They got the right man in. They gave him the opportunity to do what he wanted, put his own staff in place. And within 18 months, that club has completely turned itself on its head. So it's not impossible to do that, but you've got to find the right man. They thought they found it in Ten Hag, wasn't the right fit. Perhaps they should have cut the losses a lot earlier, because it's going to cost them money now. Where was he out of contract when they could have got rid of him in the summer? So it's a decision that they live with.
They gave him an extra year, didn't they, in the summer?
Yeah, but the other thing, they gave him an extra year, but they also give him extra money in the transfer market. So you've gone on board De Ligt, Mazraoui, two players who the new manager might look and think, oh, I wouldn't have bought them. But now you've spent more money. You've gone and trusted him to buy ex-players that he's worked with. I mean, the squad's littered with players that he's worked with in the past. So now that a new manager's going to come in again, this is again another £200-300 million rebuild. A manager will come in and say, I can work with them players for a short space of time and improve them to a certain degree. But there's a lot of work that needs going on behind the scenes.
Well, I think we were sort of saying last season maybe the reason why they weren't performing at the levels because of the amount of injuries that they had and the amount of change that they had to do in particular in that back line. But then you look at when he does get his key players back fit. You look when De Ligt is back, Martinez is back. At times, he's not even played them two. So the players that he's bringing in, he's not even using those two players. You mentioned some of the signings, add in Yoro, add in Ugarte, Zirkzee, players that he's brought in. Yeah. Have they worked? So that's the only sort of worry, is that last season, OK, you could say, well, the injuries maybe has had an impact on the results and the performances. But now those players are back fit. I think Luke Shaw's probably the only player that's not
Mainu didn't play yesterday.
Mainu didn't play, but on the whole, hasn't been fit and available.
But every single player's gone down in value.
And that's the thing. You look at good managers and you say, well, they've talking at Unai Emery. He's had pretty much the same squad over those 2 years and been able to improve those players and see the development. Whereas we just haven't seen that. We've seen glimpses, but not on a consistent enough basis. So
there are perhaps 2 points to get into there, and we'll start with you, Carvin, in that you can talk about improving players, and that is down to tactics, and we'll speak to Stephen and Sue about that in just a moment. Recruitment has been a real buzzword. That the recruitment has not been good enough for quite some time. And obviously, Ineos felt that the manager needed a little bit of help over the course of the summer, hence why people like Jason Wilcox and Dan Ashworth have arrived at the club.
Well, I think they arrived too late at the club to have any real meaningful impact during this summer's transfer window.
Because of the gardening leave for Dan
Exactly.
Ashworth.
I think the driving force behind the signings this summer, most of those signings were Erik ten Hag's signings. And if you look at recruitment under him since he came in, it simply hasn't been good enough. It's boring to go through it, or everybody knows. You can go through the list of players that he signed. The majority of them haven't worked out. The bottom line is, I don't think Erik ten Hag can have any excuses. He was managing one of the biggest clubs in the world. Somehow he still managed to keep his job after Manchester United lost 7-0 against Liverpool. I find that staggering, that any United manager can lose 7-0 to Liverpool and still keep his job. He's a good man. I think he was good to deal with. He's not a particularly good communicator, but I don't think he can have any excuses today. A lot of other owners would have cut their losses and sacked him a lot earlier than the Glazers and Ineos have done.
But actually, Stephen, that point about whether you survive a 7-0 defeat. Now, any manager can have bad days. Pep Guardiola has had the odd humbling. Jurgen Klopp lost the game 7-2 at Villa years ago. Last season, though, when you look at it, They lost at home to Palace, they lost at home to Fulham, they lost at home to Brighton, they lost at home to Bournemouth. And if we take it down the tactical route, the big criticism was, time after time, what is he trying to do with that team? And still, the answer, even up until yesterday, was not quite clear.
No, structure of the team completely wrong. The way they set up in games, didn't have the personnel to do it, didn't have the right recruitment, as Carvey says there. But when you... And I'll go back to Unai Emery, because this is a process that they're going to have to take now, is that when you work on a training ground, you can improve players. What you found with managers so often now is that they manage a game. So they prepare you for a game. But Unai Emery, I've watched him work at close hand and seen him on the training ground. He pulls players individually and improves them, makes sure that they understand what is expected of them in that position, how to receive the ball in better positions, how to find yourself in areas on the pitch to help others around you. That's a clear message of what you're trying to achieve. We can all see exactly what's going on that pitch. When I look at Ten Hag and I think, I'd love to know what he's doing in the training grounds, leading up to it, what the messages are to the players. I watch the players' body languages. When I watch Villa, when I watch Arsenal, Liverpool, Manchester City, they're all like straight away looking at the manager. What can you give us? What information can you give us to make us better on this pitch? A lot of the time, the best teams will know it anyway because they're so well prepared. But I look at this guy and they're not looking at him. They're not asking for information off him because it seems a bit ad hoc. I mean, Mazraoui playing in the 10 the other night. I mean, what is that all about? I mean, you're asking to be sacked. You're playing a left back or a right back in the number 10 position.
I think he was just trying to do something completely different, wasn't he, there?
But that's losing control. Yeah. That's losing respect of the changing room. Straight away, the changing room's looking. Don't get me wrong, Michael Keane goes up front for the last 10 minutes. He's a big centre forward. He's a big lad, 6'2", 6'3". He might win a few headers. Understandable when you're chasing a game. But to start him in the number 10 position and think that he's going to have an effect on a team in a Europa game, it's just bizarre.
I want to come to that point about respect from the change room and bringing Carvey in just a moment, but on the point about the influence of a manager tactically, Sue, and Stephen has rightly there talked about people like Unai Emery, the big clubs like Pep Guardiola, but even the big contrast last season that was made, Tottenham, Ange Postecoglou comes in, and OK, some days they get it wrong and it's maybe a bit too gung-ho, but at least you know what they're trying to do. Brighton, Fabian Hürzeler, first time in the Premier League. Straight away, you see the identity.
Maresca.
You would make an argument, how many other teams in the Premier League are the way if you were to say, what's the identity of Brighton or Nottingham Forest now under Nuno, you would get an answer. What would the answer be with Manchester United?
And that's been difficult, hasn't it? And I think that's where a lot of fans have said it is hard to see what this identity is, what is the philosophy of Ten Hag. And I suppose a lot of the problems last season, we're seeing them again this season. So whether it's not scoring enough goals, scoring 8 goals just isn't good enough for Manchester United. Yes, they're creating the chances, but they're not finishing them off. Being too easy to play through the midfield. At times, they've been better. But at times you're still seeing that they're too easy to play through. Defensively, are they good enough? So all of those issues that needed to be addressed, they don't seem to be being addressed. You know, if you could see, oh, there is a progression, there is a development, but it's hard to see that. We might see it for a half against Brentford, but we're not seeing it on a consistent enough basis, and that's just not good enough for Manchester United.
To go back then to the relationship with the players, Carvey, and you spoke earlier on in the hour about what happened in the summer. And I think it was Erik ten Hag himself who actually came out in the Dutch media and said, I know that they were talking to other candidates. Now, and we'll get a player's perspective from these two in just a moment, but if you're a player and you hear that those above the manager are openly going around trying to find someone to fill his job, your respect goes like that, doesn't it? Because you think, well, this guy's not got much left longer in the job.
I think he had a pretty difficult relationship with quite a few United players. It's been well documented. For instance, the way he handled David De Gea leaving the club. Quite a few people in the dressing room weren't very impressed with the way that was handled. Think about the way Harry Maguire publicly was stripped of the United captaincy, and then they tried to force him out of the club. And he stayed at the club and he sought sanctuary actually by playing for England while he was being frozen out by Erik ten Hag. Think of the way he handled his relationship with Jadon Sancho, where effectively United lost a player they spent 70 or 80 million pounds on because he wouldn't say sorry to Erik ten Hag. Think also of his relationship with Cristiano Ronaldo, somebody that the club spent a fortune on getting back to Old Trafford. That didn't work out. His relationship with Erik ten Hag fell apart. He was very, very scathing about Erik ten Hag and Manchester United just before he left and after he left United in a series of interviews as well. I know for a fact that, a year ago, some senior players at United went to see Erik ten Hag to express concern about his training regime. They felt that he was working them too hard. That was contributing to all the injury problems at the club. I'm not saying he'd lost the dressing room. You know, there are lots of dressing rooms where players are unhappy, but we have had a series of fallouts with big characters in that dressing room, and his relationship with the players hasn't always been that great. One final point I would make quickly is I think you've got to give credit to Manchester United supporters. Yeah. Because through this whole time, when, let's be honest, performances have been diabolical, they have followed the team home and away. And I can't think of any instances where they've been chanting for Erik ten Hag to be sacked. I can't remember seeing any banners saying, you know, the time is up. They have carried on supporting the team and also supporting Erik ten Hag through very, very difficult circumstances.
On the point about the insecurity and the speculation about his job then from a player's perspective, even if it's a subconscious thing, is there a part of you that thinks, do you know what, I'm still on a 3-year contract, I'm going to outlive this manager?
To a certain degree. That's what I said about Jadon Sancho when he was at the club. I wouldn't be in a rush to leave. If he wants to play for Manchester United, my thought was that he'll outsee Ten Hag because Ten Hag's on borrowed time because of the talk around it. So there is an element of that, but players get frustrated because they're thinking, I want to go and play football, I want to get first team games under my belt. If it does flip on its head and he suddenly starts to win games, that'll be prolonged a little bit longer. But you do get that sense that he's not going to be in this job for long. The point that Carve makes there about the senior players going to Erik ten Hag, I think that's a sign of respect to the manager. If you go to a manager to say, listen, we think you're just working us a little bit too hard, we can tweak a few things, that'll improve us as a team, that'll make things easier. If that goes on deaf ears and it's like, oh, hang about, don't come and question my authority and don't question that, you'll lose the changing room even more. When I was at Liverpool, Bolo Zendam went in because we hadn't had a day off in 3 months, and everyone will go, oh, what, you haven't had a day off? You need a change of environment every now and again. Went in to say to, listen, can we just have a couple of days off, see the families, whatever. He didn't get in a squad for 2 months because it was a knock on the door at Rafa's door, and it was a disrespectful thing, whereas it's actually trying to help the squad and understand it. So I see that as the players actually, some of them being respectful to Ten Hag and trying to help him out. But I look at some of the situations that he's handled. I just look at Marcus Rashford. I think there's probably more to Marcus Rashford than just his relationship with Ten Hag. But he looks miserable. He looks so miserable on a football pitch. And it's like, you've got to be enjoying your football. It looks like the Manchester United players on a day-to-day basis are not enjoying going into a training ground. And anyone who works in any walk of life, in any job, if you walk into a workplace and it's not the right environment, you're looking for other opportunities and you're looking to change that job.
You know what it's like, Carvey, not to have a day off in 3 months, don't you? Fingers to the bone, this hasn't helped either. Excuse me. So just another point, Sue, there, that to sort of go on what Stephen was making there, that the players look miserable. The one thing you'd say in Erik ten Hag's defence is, for example, you take yesterday, he can't legislate for Diogo Dalot missing an open goal, rather. Has it been a case that maybe the players have, I don't want to use the word down tools, but let their own performances slip a little bit because they know at the moment that he is the fall guy, and that equally, whilst he has carried the can today, there are some of them that should also be looking at the mirror themselves.
Yeah, I think you've got to, as a player, I think you've got to look and say, well, what could I have done that little bit better? How could I have performed that little bit better on there? And like you say, you can't, equate for Dalot missing an open goal, the penalty decision, the different things like that. But there's probably just been too many of those over the course of a season. And I think we all know that there's different managerial styles. And I think when Ten Hag first came in, we were actually praising his managerial style. We were sort of saying, well, he's dealt with that situation quite well. And
they got him in after the Brentford game to run the laps, didn't they? And he ran with the players, and there was a lot of praise for the way he handled that.
Definitely, yeah. So that sort of seemed to work initially, but it is just about how can I get the best out of this team and make them better, and individually, because obviously you looked at Sancho. Didn't get he obviously got the opportunities, but then went to Germany and we saw a different player, didn't we? We've seen him at Chelsea now, and we're seeing a different sort of player. So it is about how can I get the best out of these individual players to make it collectively better. And unfortunately for Ten Hag, it's just not happened.
What you've got to create in a changing room is the right characters, and the right characters are leaders and example setters. So if you look at Jurgen Klopp when he came into Liverpool were 8th in the league, and he was fortunate that he had James Milner and Jordan Henderson, people who've been James Milner had been at a big club, and he used James Milner's experience to help him both on and off the pitch and set the standards, and that was his job within the changing room to a certain degree. Great player on the pitch as well, but he knew he had to set the standards within the changing room. Manchester City have got leaders all over the pitch in the way that they go about the business. You look at the likes of Bernardo Silva, even John Stones to a certain degree, Gundogan.
Yeah.
These players, if you're late for training, if you don't set a standard within training, it'll be jumped upon. Arsenal have now got them standards because Arteta demands them standards. But it can't just be one guy at the helm. It's got to be bred throughout the squad. But the players have to buy into that. And if you could be my best friend, and if you turn up and you're late and you're not giving your all, I'll tell you, I'll give you down the banks because that's the standard. I don't want to be 14th in the league. I want to be top of the league. I want to be competing for them trophies. And I think that's where we talk about quality of players from buying players in. There has to be the quality of leadership within a changing room, the right personalities that you buy. They don't have them in the changing room. So when you talk about yesterday's result against West Ham, they shouldn't lose that game. From the way that they started that game, Bruno's not a leader. I'm not looking at Bruno Fernandes as my captain. He's a leader on the pitches in the style of football he plays, and he's a quality player. But he's not going to dig players out. He's not going to set them standards. He's not going to jump on players. But also as well, if a player jumps on you, it's about taking it the right way. It's understanding that he wants the best out of me. And there's certain ways you have to speak to certain players. I understand that. But it's about leadership and that changing.
The amount of times we've said it's been very individual, it's been like moments of brilliance rather than that team togetherness. And that's where you do need that. You're not seeing the unity on and off the ball, which obviously comes from the manager doing that in training on a regular basis and having those leaders.
Stephen Warnock, Sue Smith and our chief reporter, Kaveh Solokol, with me to react to the news that Erik Ten Hag has been sacked as Manchester United manager.